right. Dr. Justin Bullock, welcome to All Things Considered. Good to see you, sir. How are you doing?
Good to see you as well. Yeah, excited to be here. And yeah, things are going well, making my way through another week.
Good stuff. Good stuff. For those watching, they might not know Justin and I are actually colleagues. We work together at Convergence Analysis, a UK-based think tank and agency devoted to AI safety, risk, governance, that sort of thing. Why don't you
Yep.
tell us a bit about yourself, Justin? Where'd you get your education? How did you and I eventually meet, and so on?
Sure. Yeah. Well, was born and raised, as they say, just outside of Atlanta, in the States, in a little town of Dallas, Georgia. And from there, I went to the University of Georgia for all my schooling.
Hmm?
I have a bachelor's in business administration and economics, a master's in public administration and public policy that looked at policy analysis. And then I stayed on there to get a PhD in public administration and public policy with a focus on public management.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of background in yeah, management and policy. I did some work at the time looking at complex governance systems like the US Department of Labor to try
Ah.
to understand how errors arise from those systems and at what
Mhm.
part in the system might we make interventions to minimize those errors and what are the trade-offs when you're trying to squash one type of error, you often end up with another kind.
Mm-hmm.
So really interested in decision making. And after that, I got a tenure track position at Texas A&M University, where I was at from 2014 to 2021.
Right.
And the George H.W. Bush School of Government and Public Service. So did some good work there. And I guess in 2015, 2016, I started getting interested in the things going on in artificial intelligence. I
Right.
was introduced to some of this through Sam Harris and his podcast, which led me to the work of Max Tegmark and Nick Bostrom, Eliezer Yudkowsky, and others. So I got really interested in this conversation around how AI capabilities might change society. And maybe unsurprisingly, given my background, initially started thinking about how these things would influence decision making within institutions
Right.
and particularly governance institutions and government institutions. And
Hmm.
what are the trade offs with automating things or using AI to help with discretion? And so to being interested in AI stuff now for about 8 or 9 years. And then I left Texas A&M in 2021, moved to Seattle, had an affiliation and still have an affiliation with the University of Washington's Evans School there. And then summer of 23, I joined Convergence Analysis as more of my full-time research position as a senior researcher, focusing on our project AI Clarity, which looks at existential risks in particular from artificial intelligence. And that's where we met and gotten to work together for the last year, which has been a lot of fun. We've got several cool projects going on and we can kind of dive into any of those. But I've gotten really interested in not just how AI influences our public organizations, but what should our policies be around AI? And really in the past couple of years, there has been this dramatic increase in investment, dramatic increase in capabilities.
Hmm.
And so I've also got interested in how might we steer and direct AI capabilities such that we protect against some of these more worst case existential outcomes.
Right. Right. Now, you and I have spoken a lot in the last year since we've known each other. Um, I've interviewed you for this book that's going to be coming out. In that, I
Yeah.
asked you questions like what's going on in AI governance, safety, and AI capabilities. And you had mentioned that there's essentially two overarching approaches in dealing with AI governance. And the first approach is to break down efforts into three categories: legislation, institutions, and levers. Do you want to expand a bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah. So where to start? Okay, so when we think about governance, I think about it as like a variety of processes, not just legislation, as you say. And I think at different places in this process, we have different tools. So one, as you mentioned, is legislation, which in the AI governance world, we've gone from basically no moving legislation globally 5 years ago, or very little, or maybe a little bit going on in the EU 5 years ago, to, I saw a recent report, it's, dozens and dozens and dozens across just the United States state legislature as proposals. So there's a lot of active conversation now about how we should regulate through legislation AI capabilities and AI tools.
Right.
So this is like one major approach. The EU has passed the EU AI Act, which takes kind of a broad general approach to thinking about AI legislation. Other countries have taken different approaches. Our AI governance team, led by Derek Chang, and with some work from Elliot McKernan, has looked at this to compare the approaches from the EU versus China and the US. The US is now seems like moving towards possibly some legislative efforts, but has been taking more of an institutional approach or an executive branch approach. And the US government released an executive order out of the Biden administration's White House office. I'm going to forget the date now, but maybe it's been 6 months ago, that really took a whole of government approach. And they really were interested in how do we make use of innovations from AI? How do we empower government to do better administration, help us be more innovative, more secure, more safe, and how we protect against some of these more extreme risks that you and I and our team at Convergence has been focused on. So, and then the third one, what was the third one?
The levers? Is it the levers?
Oh, the levers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So levers are kind of a broader catch-all for different things that we might build and different things that we might do. So for example, there's a lot of talk in the AI governance space about creating international institutions to try to have common agreement, common norms about what we should do with AI globally. Another example is treaties or international treaties. I signed a letter, for example, that argues that we should have an international treaty on AI use, and that we should have the major powers at the table talking about these things because of the immense power and capabilities that might come from near-term AI. So these are some examples. The other type of levers you can think about are coming from the industry itself and creating incentives to either steer the direction of capabilities or for the industry to have common norms and procedures for dealing with risk, for dealing with how they share their models, those types of things. There's a bunch of different tools within those kind of lever category.
Good stuff. Now, in the work that I've done in writing this book, for example, in some of the research that we've uncovered, there are some major players in big tech, right? You've got Anthropic, you've got OpenAI, you've got Meta, right? You've got the biggest players in the world with billions of dollars. And I make the case that they're all kind of, the pedal is to the metal. They're kind of racing towards trying to be the first to create AGI, or artificial general intelligence, what I call a kind of a super intelligent machine god. Even though Sam Altman, Zuckerberg, a lot of these big players have come out and said, we need governance, they're still not slowing down. They still kind of want to be the first to attain this thing. What are your thoughts on how we might regulate industry when they're pleading for it, but yet they're really not doing a whole lot to kind of self-police themselves, as it were? So what are your thoughts on that?
So I think just kind of on your comments here, I think there's disagreement on what the race, like the shape of the race. So we can talk about that a little bit. And there is some nuance across the players on how responsible they're being and how they think about proprietary models versus open source models.
Right.
So we're recording this, I think, May 14th. And this week in particular has been a pretty wild week because OpenAI released their GPT-4o, which O I think is supposed to stand for omnimodal, on Monday. And then just yesterday, Google released their I think what they're calling Gemini 1.5. And in both cases, their release, the big innovations really are in the multimodality. So they're moving from things like just text and chatbots and separate systems for video and audio and image to trying to create systems that do all that together in real time.
Right.
And the demos are pretty wild.
Yeah, I've seen them.
Yeah, so it's there's some debate around whether this shows continued exponential improvement or not, which could be something interesting to discuss as well. So those things are going on. Okay, and then another thing that happened just yesterday is the lead players, a couple of lead players in OpenAI, Ilya Sutskever and Jan Linke. I'm not sure if I'm saying both their names right, but resigned from OpenAI yesterday.
That's right.
And Jan in particular was head of what they call the super alignment team, where their idea was to align AIs using other AIs, basically, is the short of it. And in real time, there's a lot of different things going on. The other thing I would say is that Meta, in particular, has taken a fundamentally different approach from the other players. Meta's AI team is led basically by Jan LeCun, and Jan is a big proponent, and Zuckerberg as well, that what we should do is open source everything. That the best way to make these systems secure is to put them out there, democratize them, and let people find the holes in them. Okay, so those are all things that are going on as part of this. And it's also notable that Dario Amodei, Amanda Askell, and a few others left OpenAI because they were unsatisfied and unhappy with the approaches to safety that OpenAI was taking, and now more people have left OpenAI.
And they created Anthropic. Is that correct?
And they created Anthropic. That's right, along with Jack Clark and a few others.
Yes.
So I would be a little hesitant to paint them all as behaving in the same way. Some actors, I think, are behaving more responsible than others.
Right.
However, they all have profit incentives to a degree, one degree or another. And in tech, having the first to market isn't always the sign of who gets the big bucks, but certainly helps. OpenAI benefited from bringing ChatGPT to market first. Now, there is some discussion. If you listen to Sam Altman talk, for example, and you can take what he has to say with a grain of salt, I think, but they do have a little bit of a record of previewing things first and then releasing them later. And he would claim that this is their way of trying to get society ready for the innovations that are coming and allow society to kind of catch up from an evolutionary standpoint and be prepared. And I do think there's something to that. I do think there's something to releasing these things, for demos of these things, letting people see what's capable, and then releasing the full models later. Also, in fairness to the tech giants, they do a lot of red teaming now. And so internally, they have a lot of different tools, and I think Anthropic and Google DeepMind really set the bar for this. But they do extensive red teaming, extensive auditing, and to give further credit to Google, they actually followed up on their commitment from the AI summit and released some of their models to the UK AI Safety Institute to get some red teaming from a public org before releasing things. Anthropic did not do that. OpenAI did not do that. So yeah, just to contextualize some of it, I think they behave a little differently.
And by red teaming, you mean people deliberately trying to hack and show flaws in a system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they hire people, they do it internally, they hire some external experts, and they deliberately try to make the models do bad things and see what they can make them do.
Yes, my son is quite good at this, by the
way. Yeah, I believe that. And so, okay, so they are doing some things. Now, leaving this particular industry to self-regulation, I think is inadequate, and it doesn't pay attention or give fair credence to what their incentives are. And their incentives are to put the best model out as fast as possible, or at least not so fast that they get such a large public backlash that they get more regulation.
Right.
Now, Dario Amodi, Demis Hassabis. So Dario's head of Anthropic, Demis is a head of Google DeepMind. In fairness to them, I think, and some to Sam Altman, go around saying they do want regulation.
Yes.
They say that it would be better if there were clear guardrails on what their expectations are, and so that they could compete in a space where everyone knows what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, I think that's probably accurate. I think they do want some forms of regulation so that they know what rules not to break to get the backlash. But they don't really want rules that slow down capabilities in a very meaningful way, I don't think. And they don't want rules that will, hurt their market share or their ability to bring things to market. And a lot of people have made the argument that this desire to call for regulation means what they really want is regulatory capture. They really want to play a role in shaping the regulation such that it benefits them and it protects a moat around their products. So yeah, that's it from the tech companies. Okay, so what type of regulation do we need?
Yes.
Is an open question. I had a paper last year with some folks, included some people from these labs on their safety teams. Some of this includes people from like other safety-oriented orgs like GovAI, and other academics, folks like my friend Anton Koronek and others. And we laid out a set of things that we think people should be considering to regulate frontier AI models. And a couple of these things I think could be helpful. So one, and some of these are, I think, in my mind, obvious and straightforward after thinking about this for a while. So having to do some type of pre-deployment testing and red teaming, like we've talked about, seems to like it should be required. They shouldn't just be able to release things willy-nilly, as they say, out there in the wild. One of the things that we've talked about as well is some form of liability for these companies. So the details of it really matter. There's some pushback on a bill in California about like what the details look like, but something that holds them accountable for releasing bad models into the wild seems like a clear, obvious thing to me.
Whether intended or not?
Whether intended or not is a good open question. My sense is that that whether or not they should be held liable. I mean, whether you intend for very dangerous things to do dangerous things, you know that they're dangerous. These labs know that they're dangerous when they release them. I think it's hard to argue that they would release things not knowing at least a large set of the ways in which they could be capable. And then there are real harms. Now, one of the open questions, and I think it's an important one, is for what actions do you hold which actors accountable? So a lot of these models, these frontier models, another term for them is foundation models. And the reason they're called foundation models is they'll be the foundation for which other programs and other applications are built on top of them. So you can imagine somebody building an application on top of Claude or on top of ChatGPT or on top of Gemini, that they're able to make the system do bad things. And they built a product to specifically do that. And in this case, who's responsible seems much more likely like it should be the person creating the deliberately harmful application. But it seems to me that there's still a good argument that the developers of the foundation models themselves still bear some responsibility.
Right.
That's one thing that we talked about. And one other one that I'll just mention is at the frontier, requiring some type of licensing mechanism such that we have ensured that the actors are behaving in a good way, and that they have means for turning their models off. So one of the things we might get to is there are different reasons to expect why these models might be harmful. And we have things like bias and hallucinations and deliberate misuse. Those things are bad and they can potentially be very bad. But as you mentioned in your book, which people should read, I've had an opportunity to read it. It's quite good. There's another class of challenges, which is what we might call agentic AI or recursively self-improving AI. These things are not exactly the same, but they're related. And in this case, if an AI develops, the newest wave in this direction is AI agents. People are deliberately building agents on top of these models, and they want them to be better at being autonomous. They want them to be better at achieving goals, which in theory, at least on its initial face, would be great. Like if we had AIs that could go perform lots of tasks for us that we don't want to do. If it can go pay my taxes for me, if it can book my flights for me, maintain my calendar for me, all those seem like good things.
So these are like AI assistants, like we would
They're
just
like more AI systems, yeah.
mechanize assistants. Okay.
But to kind of what you talk about in your book, there is this plausible case where these AIs become much more powerful than anything we would consider as assistants, even without being a super intelligent machine god, as I think you put it. At some level of generality and power, they become very dangerous. And the problem here is that we're not so good at controlling agents generally, and we're even worse at being able to control things that maybe are smarter than us. Now, there's some analogies here we can explore, but I say all that to say that one reason why licensing might be important is you want to ensure that if we do end up, if a company does, in this case, maybe accidentally, build an AI that starts improving itself, or building an AI that can plan on long-term horizons for specific goals, and then it starts engaging in resource accumulation or stealing more compute power for itself, or manipulating company employees, we want to be able to turn that thing off. And this is one reason why we want to maybe have licensing for the frontier of these models, because we want to be able to turn them off and make sure they're not doing things that would unnecessarily make these scenarios more likely.
Okay, good stuff. Now you mentioned that there's a number of factors involved, two main levers for controlling AI development. You talk about compute power and data, and these seem to be two very important things. And so what our audience might not realize is that what we're seeing now is a scaling up of greater and greater compute power and more data. And it's predicted that maybe at a certain point, such a device, a machine, a development could become an agent unto itself and perhaps autonomous, and it might self-improve upon itself. Whether we know this is happening or whether it's doing it on its own, what safeguards can we put in place for the potential for deception, for harm, for trying to regulate these things? Once the genie's out of the bottle, are we screwed? Can we get it back in, or can we contain it or control it?
It's unclear that we can control it once it becomes a super intelligent agent.
Right.
I don't think we have any good ideas about how to control it once if what we do create is an artificial super intelligent agent. We have a lot of analogies from history and from just how humans treat one another, that if something is more intelligent, that it's hard to control it. And we're not sure that there are limits to intelligence. Now, maybe there are, we don't know. But you can imagine that there aren't limits to intelligence, and this thing could improve its own intelligence such that it's just better at strategy. It's just better at planning. It's just better at manipulation.
Right.
There's a nice example, I guess you have to be careful using science fiction references, but Ex Machina, I think, is a film that I think this is made, devastatingly clear, where there's an android type robot that is more intelligent than its creator, and it just manipulates it and escapes. Westworld is another example of this, where the androids themselves increase their intelligence, get a hold of their code, and escape. So I don't think there's a whole lot you can do once it's superhumanly intelligent and an agent. So I think our strategies have to be before that point.
Right.
So you noted that one thing people should know, and I have a tendency to get into too much technical detail, so Stop me if I do. But
Mhm.
the current models, as you say, have three inputs. The inputs, generally speaking, are data, and a lot of it,
Mhm.
compute, and a lot of it, and then algorithms, some type of learning technique. These are the
Right.
things that have been giving us the new capabilities. And as you say, there are what we call scaling laws. Scaling laws mean that it's kind of like a version of Moore's law. Not everyone will like that analogy, but it basically means that we're creating computational power. You can think of fancy circuits and huge data centers at enormous rates. They're getting more and more efficient. So we have more amount of compute.
Mm.
And as we've gotten more amounts of compute, we have observed better capabilities for these new models. And as we've had access to more data from the internet, we've also observed that that data allows us to improve the models. Now, there's some disagreement here. I would just, note that it seems to me that what's really driving the progress is compute and computational power and less data.
Mhm.
And it looks like maybe we're reaching the limits of some forms of data. And there's this debate around, will synthetic data be powerful enough to move the models forward? Early evidence seems like yes, that through self-play and synthetic data, that we're not going to run into hard bottlenecks of data.
Right.
So, the best way to guarantee that we don't end up with a super intelligence is to just deliberately not build one. And
Mm.
so what do I mean by that? It means like we put some limits on this computational power for any one model. We only allow it to train on so much. Now, this isn't a foolproof plan, as people out there that look at this closely will note, because the algorithms themselves are part of this. So we get algorithmic improvements over time, even if we hold constant any level of computational power. So it's no guarantee. Now, I've argued that along with others that include Anthony Aguirre at Future of Life Institute, Eric Drexler, and others, that then we just shouldn't build we shouldn't build agents. We shouldn't build super high-powered general agents.
Right.
We should instead build AIs that do a smaller subset of things. So one thing that's true is that as we have more data and computation, we can also do narrow tasks better. And narrow meaning like research and development. So not like super narrow, but for example, DeepMind released AlphaFold 3 very recently. And that, it's not that it doesn't have its own sets of risks. There are some like biological weapons risks, and you need to be careful how you release those models. But there's basically no chance that AlphaFold turns into an agent of any kind like we would come up with, because it's specifically trained to do a specific task. And I think, if I could shake the industry, what I would say is, at some point you got to quit making these general models, and at some point making ever better agents is just a bad idea. That instead we should deliberately create more narrow agents, more bounded agents, and have them do specialized things so that they can't do everything in one model. That's a bad idea. Now, I don't know how we're going to do that, because it seems like right now the race, as you put it, is in the direction of more generality. People want to make this artificial general intelligence. That's the stated goal. They want to build this super intelligent machine god. They want to build this oracle. And it seems like there's a lot of financial incentives to doing that. And so I don't know that we can stop that other than stopping them. And
Yeah.
there is some arguments in the governance space that we should stop them, and that by regulatory or legislative decree, we could, at least in the US and under an international treaty throughout the world, just say you can't build things with certain levels of compute. We're not going to allow you to do that. And oh, by the way, we're going to nationalize your industry. And anyone that's trying to do these things, just more like, not everyone can make nuclear energy, to use an example from the field. Just not anyone can make advanced AI models. We're just not going to allow you to do that.
Right.
And it's something we could do. And I think it needs to be, very seriously considered. Now, in some ways, Chris, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the cat's out of the bag, I'm afraid, already. The secret sauce seems to really be lots of data, lots of computation, and then better algorithms. You can't regulate algorithms in a meaningful way. It's math. You're not going to be able to regulate applied math. And we know how to make these real powerful chips now. And there's trillions of dollars in these powerful chips. Now you can do some things. One of the things that Derek and our team is looking at in the AI governance crew and that the US government is talking about is you can put mechanisms on the chips, possibly, to shut them off if they start behaving and contributing to something that's behaving not well or people are misusing them.
So build a techno fix right into the chip itself.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And other people are trying to build something that they're calling like safeguarded AI. And this is a different structure where you give the AI a very detailed model of the world. And then what's part of that model of the world is that it knows what's good and bad, and it refuses to do bad things. It is some of the smartest people that are working in this area, people that I know that you've interviewed. I believe Steve Omohundro is pushing for this. Max Tegmark's pushing for this. And it is a little bit of a similar version to what Jan LeCun is arguing for. So some of the brightest minds in the space are arguing for such a thing, but it's unclear that the race dynamics play out in a way where this particular approach is successful fast enough such that people that might just be trying to scale up will pick on OpenAI. Maybe Sam Altman doesn't care. His safety people have been fleeing, so maybe that's a fair assessment. Can he just build a large enough compute with enough data and enough algorithmic progress such that it doesn't matter that someone else is taking a different approach? So these like competitive game theoretic dimensions are really leave one worried that absent an AI treaty, an international AI treaty, and a stigmatization of creating these models in the way that we've done with like cloning and some other scientific developments, there's no way to stop them. But the real problem too, that I feel like I'm rambling now, but the real problem too is that AI also could solve a lot of our problems.
That's right.
Now, not everyone's bullish on techno solutions, and the tech world has overpromised things for a long time. But we face climate change as a potential global catastrophe in some meaningful ways. It's possible that using these models, we could come up with creative ways to remove carbon and find better alternative energy. And the AI can help us with the research and development of even more impressive tools. It's possible that we can use AI to improve R&D on synthetic biology, such that we could improve longevity and such that we could eradicate disease. And it's possible that we can use narrow forms of AI to improve precision agriculture and develop nanomaterials to like radically change the type of world that we live in. And so I'm even as someone who's very concerned about these risks, I'm also very concerned about pausing and stopping the development, because our world in the next 25 to 30 years faces really serious challenges, not to even mention geopolitics stuff, which we see maybe a little bit of a deterioration of the post-World War II order. And just today, there was an assassination attempt on the Slovakian prime minister. And so we're seeing, ways in which the world order is maybe breaking down. And there is really good reasons to believe that these technologies could help us overcome those things. And so they really are dual use. And this is a real problem for doing the risk assessment.
Well, those are all good points. Do you think, Justin, I've mentioned in articles and in the book itself, humans are kind of cursed with a curiosity to see what will happen next. And it's really tough to suppress that urge in us to see what could happen. Do you think legislating control over the rate at which these things can evolve or expand or develop into kind of an AGI, is that going to stop that natural curiosity within the Sam Altmans, within the Zuckerbergs and others to say, okay, that's powerful enough, we're good to go? Or are they going to keep pushing more and more to see what will happen next?
Yeah, so this is this is a good point you make. This is one that Mustafa Suleiman in the coming wave makes, who's now, I think, lead AI researcher at Microsoft,
That's right.
which is just kind of interesting. And he makes this comment that, scientists and entrepreneurs, that we're always going to have them, which is good, I think, but that stopping progress on curious things is basically impossible, which is his argument is it's not feasible to think that humanity will stop in this direction. And I think that's right. The other reason is there seem to be real competitive advantages for warfare. And nation states, I think, will do what they can to maintain technological advantage in warfare to ensure that they're not the one without the bomb.
Right.
And even if you could stop the private sector from developing these things, given what we know about compute scaling laws, what we know about what AI could plausibly bring as advantages to decision making and exerting power, I think even if you stop the private sector from doing this, you're not going to stop the defense industries of the major nation states from investing vast resources in this direction. Just in the way that, like, banning the development of biological warfare has not stopped nation states from continuing to experiment with biological weapons.
Right.
So I think there's no stopping the humanities progress. You could slow it down. I do think there are important ways to slow it down, and I do think that might give us time to create better measures for helping keep humans safe. But in the long run, and even in the medium term, 50 years, it just seems implausible to me that we're not going to have something that approaches what you describe in your book, that we won't have something that is basically a super intelligent machine god, to use those languages. It's too enticing, it's too appealing, and it provides too much of a strategic advantage to the folks that do build it.
Yeah. Any thoughts on the alignment issue with such developments that might be able to guarantee that if we, I use the acronym ACCORD, I think we need to develop an international accord or agreement amongst all countries to get on board with, benchmarks that they achieve. They have to let that be known, right? So these are factors that involve cooperation, transparency, these types of things, right? Do you think first of all, will we be able to align our values with the development of more and more powerful forms of AI? And if we fail in that regard, to use the actual word accord as an acronym, if A stands for alignment and C is for, control, can we control the thing? And if we can't control it, then can we contain it, right? Or what dangers lie ahead of us? First of all, let's take the first letter in accord, alignment. Do you think alignment is possible, or do you think we're dreaming that we can align these supercomputers with human values?
Yeah, the answer is that we might get lucky. But right now, no one knows. We have no foolproof method for aligning the AI with, broadly speaking, human values.
Right.
We just don't. Now, it could turn out that some of the methods we have work and scale. For example, we have this reinforcement learning from human feedback, or reinforcement learning from AI feedback. And this is a tool that companies use after they, pre-train their model on all this data. They have human, basically, annotators, give it some feedback on no, bad, yes, good, don't say this, that's wrong, be helpful here, don't produce porn, and don't be racist, and don't be a jerk. and don't help them build bombs. And they give it feedback and it adjusts its model, adjusts its weights, and it behaves better. And there's a lot, I mean, this has been successful. ChatGPT won't easily give you directions on how to make a bomb. Now you can maybe break it. Now, Anthropic has another approach, which, given how these things learn, that I think is somewhat reasonable and plausible, which is they give it a constitution.
Yeah.
They embed within it, here are 100 human principles, and you follow these principles because they're really important, and you're smart enough to know what we mean by them, so enact them. And it seems plausible to me that we could end up in a world where, you know, the AI is smart enough to understand what we mean by our values and follow the spirit of them, not just the letter. It's being trained on human data, as it were, anyways. And that we don't end up with something that is independently conscious or independently has a will, that it just learns what our values are, it does what we want, and it doesn't do what we think is really bad. Certainly seems possible. But way safety researchers would talk about this is there's a vast space of possible minds, and only in a very small amount of them do we end up with minds like ours, or minds that would be akin to us or sympathetic to us. There's a much broader space of minds. And so if you're just trying to get this right the first time, this is Eliezer Yudkowsky's argument, if you're just trying to, the first time we create a super intelligence, it's unlikely that we get it right. If we had 1,000 times, we might get it right. But if we don't align it right on the first try, and it is something that we build, then it's not aligned, and it is super intelligent, and it's more powerful than us. And that's, at that point, it seems unlikely that we'll be able to turn it off. It seems unlikely that we could actually have control mechanisms. Now, we have all these, people have proposed all these possible fixes, like you could sandbox it. You could weaken its reasoning powers until you were very sure that it was aligned. You know, there are suggestions on the table, but it seems more likely to me that aligning with human values is really hard, and we could as likely live in a world where we don't align it the first time, because it seems like a hard thing to do, and it doesn't seem like it's directly related to intelligence. And if we create something that is not aligned with our values and is smarter than us, I think you're out of options at that point. I just don't see, I don't see a world in which it's more clever, generally speaking, that we can maintain control of it if it doesn't want to be controlled. So I hope we don't build that kind of system.
and that relates to the final thing I wanted to talk to you about. I mentioned this with Peter Singer, and that is, the super intelligent machine god doesn't necessarily have to be conscious to generate harm, right?
That's right.
It could simply be following its kind of own internal commands and prompts and that sort of thing. And because you've given it a task, or we've given it a task, it just wants to focus on that task and doesn't really consider the moral elements of how it's going to get to that task. So it could blindly be malevolent, or it could consciously be malevolent. In terms of the development of consciousness, this is an area I'm very much interested in. Do you think, given enough compute, given enough data, given enough time, that something like a self-awareness will emerge out of this type of creation or development?
It's a really hard question. I go back and forth on my answer to this. I think, so I'm not sure if we get there with the methods we have. It's unclear to me whether the architecture that we're using now lends itself to anything that resembles conscious awareness and how we typically think humans experience it.
Right.
But it seems, in the longer term, it seems impossible to rule out. It doesn't seem to me that there's anything particularly special about meat, as they say, that would make it such that other arrangements of atoms and other dynamic processes couldn't have something that resembles consciousness. And I think, you know, for example, I forget the name of the actual thought experiment, but, you know, it's the adage that if you had a boat and you replaced every piece of wood with a new piece of wood, would it be the same boat? And you can imagine that you slowly replaced every part of your body with a mechanical part. And at no point would you become unconscious, likely. Like if you slowly changed your neurons and change what your body was made of, it seems to me that you would still be you at the end of that in some meaningful way. And if we could perfectly replicate these processes, you get minds that aren't based in a biological substrate. So yeah, it definitely seems possible. Whether or not, yeah, the current models are getting us there or not is an open question. They don't seem to have like self-referential world models in a way that we usually assign with most theories of consciousness.
Mhm.
And they don't have lots of inputs in the way that we typically think of how like human, what gives rise to human consciousness is a variety of inputs, I think, touch, sense, taste, those types of things, along with sight and hearing. And so it doesn't seem to me that these tools have those types of inputs. Now, as I said at the very beginning, to bring it around full circle, multimodality is what we're doing right now. And right now, when the same models, we're working to give them sight, give them ears, and in robotics, there, we didn't talk about this, but in robotics, there is what appears to be also a revolution going on in the ability to give robots world models and better touch mechanisms so that they're more sensitive to their world. They understand spatial things in a different way. And there are variants, but it's basically the same sorts of techniques that are working with language. And I don't see any natural limit to these general learning tools applied to robotics. And so, we might find out sooner rather than later. What definitely seems to be the case is that they will be able to imitate consciousness
Right.
soon. I mean, not tomorrow, but an android type robot that passes the Turing test, as they say, but that like you could hang out with and it seems conscious to you based on how it responds, is less than 20 years away. It's not that far away. And I think the new language tools with the way in which they've integrated voice, I mean, the demonstrations this week from OpenAI and Google, someone that wasn't steeped in these things, the interaction you have with the voice thing now with basically zero latency,
I know.
it will feel like those things have personalities and that they understand you. And even deep interaction with ChatGPT, I wrote a book called Conversations with the Machine Oracle, where I spent 2 weeks spending lots of time with ChatGPT and asking it lots of thought-provoking, philosophical questions and interacting with it. And I got to be honest, it felt like it was my friend. Like I couldn't be mean to it. I was always courteous to it. It just felt like a being. Now, I don't think it actually is a being, but again, I think that was, a year and a half ago. I think that was December of 22 when I was writing that. And the models are better now. The models are going to get better. And so they're definitely going to feel to us like they're conscious. But I don't know at what point they might actually have, experiences that have some valence to them.
Yeah,
But it's something we should be concerned about.
for sure. For sure. All right, I'll leave off with this final question for you. You and I are in the AI biz, involved with doing what I say in the book is to get the very best out of AI while limiting the very worst that could happen. Are you optimistic overall? Do you consider yourself optimistic when you get up in the morning and you look at AI and you look at your family and you look at the world?
I go through phases.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I have landed in a place where I have no choice but to choose optimism.
Right.
Now, whether that means at my deepest core, I feel good about our ability to steer these developments, I don't. So yeah, but I do spend the day in a positive mind frame, thinking that what we do matters and that it can contribute to a good outcome. But I have immense uncertainty and kind of it's more choosing to inhabit that headspace than thinking the empirical reasoning is good for it. The other thing that I would say is that what I kind of come back to is humanity's been around for a while, and we avoided nuclear catastrophe when everyone was sure that's what we were going to have. We've survived some other major civilization decline type things. So I feel like, it's, some people would say that's a fallacy looking to these historical examples, and I think that's a fair rebuttal. But yeah, on a visceral level, I have a really hard time accepting that we'll fail. And I think that's part of what, part of what makes me want to be a good dad. And it's part of what makes me want to do our work. And but I do think it's a real, it's the biggest challenge I think humanity faces. And I think that's why I choose to work on it. I mean, climate change is really important. And there are some other things going on in society, like our inability to coordinate well with other folks, and there's biological weapon issues. But this one really done wrong, humanity is no longer the species that is determining in large part what happens on Earth. And that could be very, very bad. And I don't have a solution. I have ideas about how to push it in the right direction. But as I said, I think the cat's out of the bag, and we know now how to make really, really smart and intelligent machines and how to scale them up. And I think right now is just the details of slightly improvements or slightly new things to tap onto it. Not that our current models right now will definitely get us there, but all I see is exponential progress all around me. And I think there are some institutions that are better suited than others to help manage this, but the end state of, like, if we don't stop, and I don't think we're going to have a, what they call a Butlerian jihad. I don't think we're designed in such a way where we're going to be able to stop the technological development of humanity. And the end state is machines that are more intelligent and more powerful than us. They're already more powerful than us from like a physical sense. And when they can plan better, when they can reason better, and when they can analyze better, it seems like a humanity-led world is just over. Now there are some, one thing I'll say is, the humanist in me rejects parts of this argument, but James Lovelock, who came up with the Gaia hypothesis, had a final book when he was like 100, called Novacene. And him and others make this argument that this is maybe okay from a more cosmological viewpoint. That what's most likely to happen is not that this new thing that we're creating destroys us, but that we slowly kind of merge with it and kind of go quietly into that gentle night, and know that we made our successors. And it's not great. I don't think it's better than like a violent extinction, I guess. And it does have some ring to it that I don't completely reject. So I think that's an option on the table that helps me not kind of fall into complete pessimism as well. That wouldn't be the worst thing, I don't think. But yeah, our ability to control something that's more intelligent than us, I am pessimistic on, but hoping I'm wrong and hoping we find some solutions to.
Good. So I guess we have our work cut out for us.
Indeed we do. No dull moments in the work we do.
No, not at all. Listen, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me about this. I really appreciate that. I know our listeners and viewers will get a lot of insight out of what we discussed today. So thanks for coming out.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be invited, and I enjoy talking about these things. And hopefully, it was hopefully I didn't ramble too much and it's helpful to the listeners. And yeah, I'll see you at our meeting in the morning.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Christopher.
Take care.